Let me take a sip of my chocolate mint slush for okay. Hey everybody, it's that time of the year where I change the vibe of my channel from gaming to booktuber real quick because I actually read books this month. I know. I actually read a lot of books this month. I read 10 and a half, and if you're wondering why I said a half, it's because I finished a book starting at the beginning of May that I started in April. So technically 11 if we count that one. I actually read some really good books this month too. I'm really surprised with myself. I didn't even realize it until I was going back and reviewing my reviews of the month on what books I read. Out of the 11 books I have read this month, 7 of them were 4 or 5 stars. This is the month, guys. The Bobby recommendations are strong, and we are gonna talk about some really good books I read. So to start off, at the beginning, I finished Phoenix Extravagant, which is about a character named Jebby, I think I'm saying it right, and they are a non-binary painter who goes to work for the Ministry of Armor, which owns this dragon, the dragon you see on the cover. It's basically like a fantasized version of Japan's colonization of Korea. Basically, Jebby steals this dragon and befriends it, and there's a really complex like sort of magic system involving painting and like painting sigils, or yeah, they're called sigils. It's really hard to explain the plot of this book personally. I'm not going to lie, this was recommended to me by Chandler, and I'm not gonna lie, I haven't told Chandler this, but I absolutely did not know what was going on for at least 50% of the book. That didn't change the fact that I had a good time. I enjoyed it. I really liked the interactions between Jebby and the dragon, and the dragon has a name and I suddenly don't remember it at all. I'm gonna find it, guys. You just have to give me a second. There's a queer romance in here, by the way, between Jebby and another character, and that was cool. That was fun. Honestly, this month has been so long that I kind of forgot my feelings toward this book fully, just that I had a good time. Arazi is the dragon's name. I did give this book a 4 out of 5 stars because I liked it. I had fun. And then I moved on to a romance book, Fake It Till You Bake It by Jamie Wesley. It's about a girl named Jada Townsend Matthews, who is an ex-reality TV star who is hated by the internet because she turned down a marriage proposal from the show, and so she's kind of like public enemy number 1. She finds herself in a cupcake bakery called Sugar Blitz, which is owned by football player, where's his name? Donovan Dell. They kind of have a little meet cute where they don't really like each other, and then she starts to work at the bakery. She actually decides to fake a romance with Donovan because of all this negative attention she's getting. And so it's somewhat enemies to lovers and then fake dating tropes, and I really liked it. I thought it was good. The beginning, I will say, their actual meet cute scene was really cringe and made me a little hesitant to continue, but the rest of the book was pretty darn good, and I honestly really liked their relationship and the dynamics, and I liked reading about like the little events that happened in the cupcake shop and all that, and I feel like their banter was really cute. Honestly, just not a bad romance at all. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I really liked it, and yeah, that's Fake It Till You Bake It. Then I read A Man Called UVA, not Ove. I thought it was Ove the whole time I read this book until I went and read a review. UVA by Frederick Bachman. This is my first Frederick Bachman novel, and I know that he has a ton out, including one I think called Anxious People. Yeah, Anxious People, it's literally on the front cover. I started with this one because I also know that there are 2 film adaptations, the first one being like the actual Swedish adaptation, and then the second one being A Man Called Otto with Tom Hanks, which I watched that movie, by the way, gave it a 3 out of 5 stars because this book was a 5-star read. I loved this book. It basically follows Uva, the grumpy old man on the cover, and he's just a grumpy old man, and you kind of learn about his life, his whole story, and you kind of learn why he is the grumpy man he is now. He had a wife named Sonia who ended up dying from something. Oops. maybe I don't remember. His wife Sonia died, and because of that he is tore up with grief, and he decides that he wants to join her. So throughout the book we see him make several attempts to commit suicide, so that is a trigger if you're planning on reading this book. All these attempts he keeps failing at because he has these crazy neighbors, and he's just constantly bothered by these neighbors, and they are constantly on his ass. You really see him begin to warm up to them and form actual relationships with these characters, and it's just a sweet little book about a grumpy old man finding purpose in life again after he loses the love of his life. And I cried. I really enjoyed this book. I loved Uva's little relationships with all the neighbors. It was such a sweet, just heartwarming story. So loved that one. Then I read This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El Motar and Max Gladstone. It kind of blew up on Twitter a while ago because of one person's tweet. It follows time agents Red and Blue in a time travel war, and they're basically just traveling between universes and leaving each other letters, and they fall in love. So it's a sapphic romance in this incredibly like fantasy sci-fi world. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I liked it. I liked the relationship. I do think that my one issue with this book was that I didn't receive enough context of the actual like world building for me to fully understand what was going on the whole time. So there was just always a like bit of confusion the whole time I was reading. And then also because it's just a book mostly in the format of letters and these characters retrieving each other's letters and just talking to each other, there's not a whole lot of action. It's a very passive book because of that. Most of the time I don't really like books like that. I think the only reason why I was able to get on board with this one is because I genuinely was captivated by the romance, and I could feel their love, and they were just, the way they spoke to each other was so pretty. And I liked the way it ended as well. It was a very good ending. So yeah, 4 out of 5 stars, liked this one. Go ahead and read it, if it sounds like something you'd like. Then I read a book that I don't have with me because I sold it. The next book I read was Young Mungo by Douglas Stewart, and I gave that book a 3 out of 5 stars. It follows Mungo, who is living in, I think, either 80s or 90s Glasgow, and he's a 15-year-old boy who is discovering his sexuality, and he falls in love with another boy named James. And Mungo is Protestant and James is Catholic, and there's a lot of religious warfare in this book and a lot of tension between those differing religious groups. That brings tension into their romance, along with the fact that they are two boys in 80s/90s Glasgow. There's 2 different points in the plot that the book follows. It follows before, which is Mungo meeting James, them falling in love, and then after, which is this random fishing trip that Mungo goes on with these 2 older men. The book also explores Mungo's family, especially his dynamic with his mother, which is a very weird relationship. If you were to read the book, you would know what I mean. And it also goes a little bit into the backstory of his sister Jody and his brother Hamish? I don't know, I'm sorry. The reason why I was not vibing with this book is, for one, the plot point with the fishing trip and the 2 older men contains some very graphic depictions of sexual assault, which is a trigger warning if you want to read this book. It was also just boring. That whole plot point, that whole story was boring as hell and never really picked up for me, even when we got to the uncomfortable scenes. Most of this book was just, it felt to me like a lot of fluff that I wasn't really invested in. I wasn't even feeling their romance as much as I wanted to. I wasn't really believing in it as much as I wanted to, so it didn't work for me. I know a lot of people adore that book. I think for me personally, the reason why I wasn't vibing with it is also because I think I'm pretty much done with reading books about queer pain and homophobia and violence and hate crimes against gay people, because there is a lot of that too. I know it's a very real issue, but it's just not something I want to read about anymore. I didn't really feel for this book. I just wasn't vibing with it, so I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. Then I read a crazy book, Fairest by Gail Carson Levine. It's very shiny, as you can see. The only reason why I read this book is because it's a book that I read in 7th grade and remember like loving it, and it's about a girl named Azza who is, according to her and according to the standards in this book, she's butt ugly even though she's skinny. think she would do just fine here in our world. But she's butt ugly because she has black hair and dragon red lips, and she's very tall and wide, and she's not fair-skinned and pretty and dainty like the girls in this book. But she lives in a kingdom called Aortha. The culture of this kingdom involves a lot of singing, and she has the fairest voice of them all. And she has this ability that she calls elusing, where she can sing with like her mouth closed and she can throw it. She can also perfectly mimic people's voices. And I purely read it for the childhood nostalgia. I only gave it a 3 out of 5 stars because it's just, that's what it was to me. It was just nostalgia. The most interesting part of the book is the singing and the elusing, and so then when later on in the book, when like things get a little crazy, I kind of was like, okay, I want to be over with this. Then I changed it up and I read a thriller. I read The Housemaid by Frida McFadden, which has taken over the world in book talk and booktube. Not really, but it's a very popular thriller, and I've heard that just Frida McFadden in general is a really good author. When I picked this book up at Walmart to buy it, I was with my dad and he knew who she was and was like, she's really good. I've read like 5 of her books. I was like, what? It follows a girl named Millie who decides to work as a housemaid, a live-in housemaid for this rich family of the Winchesters, and the wife Nina is crazy. She makes messes on purpose and then gaslights Millie into thinking she's dirty and filthy, and she just does some crazy stuff in this book. The husband Andrew is really handsome and kind, and she falls in love with him. The reason why the cover looks like this, and the really creepy thing is, she realizes the attic that she lives in, the door only locks from the outside, so what can that mean? So it's just, you know, a bunch of twists and turns. I really like this book. I gave it a 5 stars. I read it in one sitting. I sat down and I read it from like noon to 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock. I don't really remember. I loved this book, and Frida McFadden is really special with her writing of thrillers because she does this thing where you think you have the twist, but then she surprises you with something even more, and it's like, wow. Personally, I think that Sarah Snook, Queen Sarah Snook Chevrolet's Succession, would play Nina Winchester so well. I was just picturing her the whole book. Like, that made it even more fun for me. But yeah, 5 out of 5 stars. I really loved this one. So if you want a good thriller for the summer, pick this one up. Alright, moving along. I read A Little Bit Country by Brian D. Kennedy. And so it follows a boy named Emmett and another boy named Luke. And Emmett is moving to Tennessee to live with his aunt for the summer in Jackson Hollow, and he is going to be a performer at, what is this place called? Wanda World, which is the famous amusement park for the country singer, country legend, Wanda Jean Stubbs, which is just this book's version of Dolly Parton. And he wants to become the world's biggest country music gay superstar. That's him. And then we have Luke Barnes, and he wants to be a chef, but his family's poor. Wah wah. And his mother suffers from some chronic illness. I forgot the name of it. She's unable to work because of it, and in the start of this book, she's actually on bed rest for it. And so Luke has to support his family along with his stepfather. So he struggles. And also his family is very, conservative. Oh, by the way, it's June 1st when I'm recording this, so happy gay month, guys. Yeah, so they form a little romance, and I gave this book a 3.5 out of 5 stars. It was pretty mid for me. It wasn't terrible. I actually loved the whole setting of Wanda World, and I'm not even really a country music fan, but I loved just reading about it. It was just something different, and I really liked it, and I liked the setting. The only thing that I didn't like about this book that made it lose so many points for me, besides the fact that it was just kind of corny and cringy at certain points, is because of Luke's family. He is severely closeted, and so he only wants to see Emmett in secret. You know, that whole song and dance, if you've ever read a book about a closeted person, you know, is super mean and pretends he doesn't know Emmett when he's around other people, and it hurts Emmett's feelings, and that causes a tear in their relationship. So I personally just can't read books like that anymore and really like them. Like, I'm so over that storyline. It was okay. I had fun reading it, but it wasn't my favorite, so 3.5. And then I started the Throne of Glass series by Sarah J. Maas. I'm not even gonna fully talk about this. It follows Selena Sardothien, who is the famous assassin of this kingdom, and she's been living in these salt mines as a slave. And then suddenly the crown prince is like, hey, you're actually gonna come compete in this little contest to be my father, the king's champion. And if you win this contest and defeat all the other 22 men that are very powerful and also assassins and murderers and thieves, you can be the champion, and after 6 years or 4 years of service, you will be free and absolved of your crimes. But there's something dark at present, something magical, even though magic was banned from this world, and it's just her discovering that darkness. There's like 8 books in this series or whatever. It gets expanded so much. This is only the first book. I gave this book a 4.5 out of 5 stars. The only problem I had with this book was that the beginning was a little slow. I also don't really care for the romance between either or of the boys, because there's 2 boys and it's definitely a love triangle, and I didn't really care. I like this one, so definitely gonna continue. Then I read this book, The Stars and the Blackness Between Them by Junauda Petrus, and oh my god. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. I cried. I loved this book. It follows 2 girls. The first girl is Audra, who lives in Port of Spain, Trinidad, and essentially she is forced to go live with her father in Minneapolis when her mother discovers Audra with another girl. There she meets another girl named Mabel, who lives in Minneapolis, who soon discovers that she is actually living with a terminal illness. And my review that I put on my app, on the app Storygraph, which is where I review all my books, I wrote, so unapologetically raw and vulnerable and magical, a beautiful love story that bends and redefines tragedy. I'm so happy Petrus was given the space to tell the multitude of stories and experiences embedded in this book. Amazing. Cried until I had a headache. Yeah, literally cried, and then I had a massive headache afterwards. But yeah, this is just Audra and Mabel's love story, and it's not just a love story. There's sisterhood, there's exploration of multiple cultures, including Trinidad and Black African American experiences. It's just such a beautiful book. I loved this book. I love how much soul she puts into her writing. One thing I really liked about it, there's a lot of side characters of their friends who are also Black girls. The thing I really loved about their friendships is they were really honest and open with each other and very comfortable with crying in front of one another. Never see that in books, TVs, movies, definitely not in real life. People are just not comfortable with each other enough to cry and be so openly sad and grieving and heartbroken in front of one another. Junauda Petrus just said, fuck that, we're being vulnerable with our friends, and it just created a whole new level of sisterhood and love I never get to read in books. So freaking amazing. Loved it. Then I wrapped this month up with another fantasy book. I read The Gilded Ones by Namina Forna, which I gave this book a 3.5 stars out of 5. Let me front by saying I like this book and I will be reading the sequel. The reason why I gave it a 3.5 stars is because it is so slow. The pacing is really slow, and most of the action does not actually start until halfway through the book, and this book is 415 pages long. But it follows a girl named Decca. She lives in a village and she has just turned 16, and therefore she undergoes something called the ritual of purity, which is where young girls are bled to see if their blood is red or gold. If it's red, they're normal and they can become a part of society and get married and all that. Or if it's gold, that means they are impure, they're basically demons, and they are sentenced to the death mandate, which means they have to die, they have to be killed off because their species is demons and they are unnatural and shouldn't be here. And she is luckily saved from this horrible fate by a woman who promises her this deal where she goes off and trains to be a part of the Emperor's army to fight against these creatures called the Death. Decca learns a lot more about herself and realizes she's way more powerful than she ever could have imagined. conversation. I thought the pacing was too slow. I also thought there was too much internal dialogue. And when authors write like that, it just takes me out because I don't need to read so much internal dialogue between sentences of conversation. And finally, I also wasn't really caring at all for the romance in this book. There's a romance and I feel like it developed too quickly. I wasn't really rooting for it. I didn't find it believable. I didn't get enough development from them. Definitely, there were a lot of moments where I was disconnected from this book because of those reasons, but I still liked it and I still plan to read the sequel. So in conclusion, I read a fuck ton of books this month, and I can't wait to do that again in June because it's summer, and summer is the only time I have free time to actually read. Thanks, college! But yeah, those are the books that I read. Hopefully you might have found some books in this video that you might want to read now too. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys!